All right, you are still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of NTA. Now we are turning to the economy today with a focus on the IMF's growth projections for 2021. And to set the tone for the conversation, here is Abdulsalam Jibril with a backgrounder.
As the world continues to grapple with COVID-19, the human toll and economic damage are indicators of the biggest shock the world has experienced in decades. Significant reductions in income and unemployment, occasioned by massive job losses, coupled with disruptions in major economic sectors such as transportation and manufacturing, are among the grave consequences of COVID-19. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, however, seems to be making progress towards significant recovery even as effects of COVID-19 persist. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, recently revised upwards its growth forecasts for the Nigerian economy in 2021 to 2.5% from its earlier projection of 1.5% in January. This was announced in its World Economic Outlook update, released on Tuesday, 6 April 2021. Recall that the Nigerian economy exited recession in the fourth quarter of 2020 with about 0.11% growth. This, the IMF maintains, played a huge role in its upward review of the country's growth projection, given recent positive developments in the economy. The IMF hinged its projection of growth in some sectors that include information and communications technology, ICT, and agriculture. Experts maintain that while the IMF's upward review is commendable, it is not yet uhuru for the country's economy. They recommend exchange rate reforms and stretching efforts to increase government revenues, among other strategies. The question to ask now is, what measures are in place to sustain the upward outlook of the Nigerian economy, and what are the implications of IMF's forecast for the Nigerian economy? These are issues that will engage guests on the program shortly.
Thank you, Abdulsalam Jibril, for that backgrounder. With us in the studios now to discuss this issue, we have two regular guests on Good Morning Nigeria. Professor Uche Uwaleke is a professor of capital markets. He's also president, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Prof. Uwaleke, delighted to have you this morning.
Thank you very much, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Okay. Let's the other guest with us in the studios is Yushua Aliyu, who is a financial analyst and also regular on Good Morning Nigeria. Yushua, pleasure to have you this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Nigeria.
And joining us via Zoom from Lagos is the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Moda Yusuf. Dr. Moda Yusuf, it's a pleasure to have you this morning on our show. Well, I just hope he had me, yes. So that we wouldn't, start now to have difficulty having our connections right. Well, gentlemen, you're welcome. Thank you. Right, and Kinsley, let's start with Uche Uwaleke, because most Nigerians do not understand these projections, because before now, IMF had projected differently, before now, and now they're talking about 2.5%. From 1.8% in 2020. So was this projection actually expected?
Okay, well, I would say it was expected. Expected, in the sense that from time to time you would expect the IMF to, revise their forecasts. The forecast they had in October 2020 was 1.5%. And surprisingly, the economy pulled out of recession. If you recall, the IMF had projected 4.3% contraction, for the entire economy for 2020. 4.3. But the economy did 1.92. Okay, the contraction we had in 2020 was 1.92. Of course, which is a better outcome compared to what the IMF had projected. By and large, of course, it is a forecast, is a mere projection. Nothing says that tomorrow, in the next couple of months, that won't be revised. But I think, in my view, the 2.5 projection is a little realistic. I think the economy is likely to grow. GDP growth rate for 2021 is likely to come in at between 2 to 2.5% for 2021, which is, as I said, a little realistic. Now, compare that to what the federal government had estimated in 2021 budget, which is 3%, which I consider a little ambitious. So I think this one is a lot more reflective of what we should expect. And by the way, even the projection is below the world average. The world average is 6% by the IMF. It's also below the sub-Saharan Africa average of 3.4. So what that means is that the Nigerian economy is still going to underperform sub-Saharan Africa and also underperform global average. And if you look at the historically, at least in recent times, we have not even done up to 3% since 2015. The highest we've had since 2015 has been 2.7% GDP growth rate. And since then, recall that in 2016, the economy went into a recession, and the economy fell by 1.6%. And the recovery, was also mild, was also tepid. In the following year, 2017, we just had, something in the region of 0.8. In 2019, 1.92. And then in 2020, we're having 1.92 contraction following the recession. So I think, again, it's realistic. And that growth is going to come from, in my view, the oil sector is going to contribute. As you know, on 1st April this year, the OPEC Plus, 23 member countries, 13 OPEC and 10 other countries led by Russia, had an agreement to ease production cuts and to add additional 2 million barrels per day, into the production. And of course, the OPEC Plus controls more than 50% of global output. So what that means is that there is likely going to be increased revenue, for Nigeria. And again, that's also on the back of the fact that OPEC is projecting increased demand, in the coming months. Summer is approaching. As lockdowns are eased, globally, as the vaccination progress, is being made, that there will be increase in oil. And once there is increase in oil, you will also expect that the price of oil will stabilize. So it's going to come from oil price. It's also going to come from the oil price and oil production. It's also going to come from the non-oil sector. If you also recall, the non-oil sector was the sector that powered the exit from recession that we had in quarter 4 of 2020.
Professor Waleke, let's pause you in the meantime, and then we will return to the likely sectors of growth for 2021. I want to turn to Yusha Waliu and Professor Waleke. Maybe we also have the opportunity of taking this question. What is the utility of IMF projections? Because they make their forecasts, sometimes is hit or miss. I mean, it's like occasionally when you're looking at the IMF projections, you're watching elite soccer matches. You're saying, okay, Liverpool will be hosting Real Madrid. They lost 3-1 in the first leg. If the following players are on the field of play, this is a likely outcome. And then Real Madrid goes to Liverpool. I don't know, the match is coming up shortly. And then, of course, the guys get on the field of play, and then you get to see the scores. Real Madrid is hosting another Clásico against Barcelona. You're making all kinds of permutations, and, of course, Real Madrid ends up defeating Barcelona. So what is the utility of IMF projections, by the way?
Projection economically are just assumptions, and you look at certain instrument being used in an economy to make a projection. If you recall vividly, for instance, the Nigerian economy in 2017 was projected to grow by 3.5%, but the same projection was reviewed presently to about 3%. So there is nothing wrong with projections because they are based on assumption and based on critical assessment of key instruments used in that economy. Let me also identify, for instance, some of the key areas IMF is always projecting. They project not only based on economic potentials of those economies, they also project based on bilateral and multilateral engagement of different economies. And that is why you find out recently even the IMF has to revisit the case of India. But the projection of India in 2021 and 2022, the GDP projections. So it's normal to make projection because these experts, they take a look at some of the rating agencies' projections, and they look at also the projection made by, for instance, Bureau of Statistics of different states. And at the same time also, this organization, IMF, they have resident experts in those economies. So it's not just, it's just to preempt, it's just to prepare economies, and at the same time to see how the strength of the economy is. I have seen a case in this projection looking at the fact that they hit on two issues: sharing prosperity. So these economies are operated differently and invested differently. And if you take pre-COVID-19 projections, is quite different from the projection the IMF is making today, based on many factors. Some economies went into lockdowns. Some economies were successful to inject the right ingredient to prosper the economy, like the Indian economy. You cannot compare Indian economy with the Nigerian economy, for instance, where you have the projection rate raised by the government was reduced. In the case of India, their projections was, in fact, not even IMF. The earlier projection of 6% GDP growth was reviewed. And at the same time, if you look at the United States economy, the kind of injection that was made in the economy is not the same injection. So bilaterally, nations have to look, has to sit together, look at their economic potential, and then make certain adjustments that will favor the economy. And remember that the most important aspect of all this injection and putting this assumption in an economy is just to create more jobs, protecting jobs, and at the same time creating alternative revenues. IMF has cried that most of the poorer countries are overburdened by debt. Nigeria is one. So it is good for that projection, for the policymakers to look into their borrowing plan. That is one. Two, to also look into alternative sourcing where they can properly coordinate the economy and then create wealth within the economy and then inject it back into the economy for the GDP prospects.
I'll just, Kieran, I would like Dr. Muda Yusuf to also take a shot at the question. In particular, the utility of IMF projections. Is the utility to be found in the fact that, fine, IMF has done its mapping, and then you as an economic player, either at the subnational level or at the national level or at the micro level, you say, okay, we're going to take our investment decisions based on this. Of what use are these projections in the first instance to the management of a nation's economy?
Thank you very much. Once again, good morning. The projections are good for purposes of analysis, for purposes of having a better insight as to how an economy is performing. Don't forget, the economy is not just for those of us that are here. It is also a lot of foreign investors have interest here. And when people want to take decisions concerning investment, these are some of the information sources that they rely on to determine how the health of the economy, to determine whether to invest or not to invest. And investment is key. Domestic investment is very critical to the development of any economy. Foreign investment is very critical to the development of any economy. So the signals that people get, that investors get from the IMF, from the World Bank, and other multilateral institutions are things that also form the basis of investment decisions. They form the basis of the movement of capital, international capital, to different countries. And to the extent that any country desires investment, desires this capital, I think to that extent we can say that these figures, these projections are very useful because again, it is seen also as an independent source, as against what you could have individually in different countries. This is more independent, and it's probably people ascribe a lot of credibility to it. But again, the concern sometimes about some of these projections is the fact that sometimes some of these multilateral institutions don't have a clear understanding of what is happening in the domestic economy. They don't understand some of the variables. So sometimes their projection doesn't, relate properly with what is happening on the ground. These are some of the values that these things bring.
Well said. You give us two perspectives to this. First is that it could be the basis for investment decisions, especially for foreign partners who want to invest in Nigeria. You're also saying that IMF projections may not take into cognizance the domestic economy, as it were. So, which means that the projections perhaps may serve good purposes, may also not necessarily required for the growth of any economy. So let's bring in Professor Waleke here. Now, what are the parameters for IMF's projections in the first place?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, something to do with the utility of the projections. Yes, the projections have a way of engendering confidence in an economy, okay? And they also have a way of enhancing the creditworthiness, of a country. Recently, I read that the federal government has plans to issue Eurobonds, okay? And of course, Eurobonds are instruments for borrowing from the international capital markets, okay? Now, the success of that issuance may also depend on some of these forecasts, because if an investor or a lender is told, for example, that a country is likely to contract, or a country is likely to go into recession, of course you would expect that lender or that investor to have a rethink. So it enhances the creditworthiness of a country, in addition to helping to boost investment opportunities. Now, talking about the criteria, if you look at the forecast, the forecast, we'll talk about certain elements that are within the macroeconomy. That IMF forecast, clearly said that the forecast they are making is dependent on the part of the pandemic. The part of the pandemic. In other words, the extent to which, countries manage the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the case of sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the case of commodity-prone countries, it's also a reflection of the likely state of those commodities. Okay, in the case of Nigeria, for example, IMF would have also looked at the oil price or the international oil market before making such projections. Another criterion that IMF would focus on will be on the fiscal deficit. Okay, where a country has very high fiscal deficit, especially deficit to GDP ratio, or high debt service to revenue ratio. Okay, that will also affect the forecast. Because if you have huge fiscal deficits, if the country has been borrowing so much, that will have a way of crowding out private investment. So these are some of the things the IMF must have looked at, before coming up with the forecast. And as I said earlier on, if you look at the forecast for Nigeria, it's even below that of sub-Saharan Africa, on account of some of these factors, in terms of fiscal deficit, for example, in terms of even other macroeconomic fundamentals, such as unemployment, for example, and even inflation, because these also have tangential nexus, to real GDP growth.
Okay, Professor Waleke, thank you very much. Usual, Dr. Muda Yusuf a while ago did say that, yes, in some cases, IMF projections may not fully accommodate all the variables in a country. IMF is projecting 2.5% growth for us in 2021. That's the revised projection. What is it that the IMF is seeing and making this projection of 2.5 on the one hand? And then what is it that we know about ourselves, about our production capacity, and about other domestic variables that could either enable us hit that target, miss the target, or indeed or surpass the target?
Thank you. If you look carefully, not only sub-Saharan Africa, but if you look Africa as a whole, there has already been a projection that Nigeria is the biggest economy in this part of the world. So the IMF always look at the capacity of the economy, the investment in the economy, and the intending investment in that same economy. Remember, most of the development plans of Nigeria, most of the injections made into this economic development, sometimes Nigeria has to extend hard to IMF for intervention, especially like what Professor has mentioned, that when we are taking when we took the prediction of the IMF before COVID-19, pre-COVID-19, it's quite different from what the IMF is now projecting 2.5 as the GDP growth rate for a nation like Nigeria. Now, some of the indices which the IMF is also looking, like I said initially also, they look into domestic economy not through the eyes of the IMF, but they look the economy through the statistic bodies in the economy, like, for instance, the Bureau of Statistics, the Bode Augusto and Co., and other rating agencies. So these rating agencies always look at the key sectors and sectoral investment that is being made, and also the performance of that same sectors to the economy, and also looking carefully into the domestic economy, you understand also the appropriations, the plans of the government as far as capital development of the economy is also concerned. IMF is concerned first with the reduction in poverty. So most of the investment that is coming to the economy through the IMF, either through other multinational like the World Bank, is targeted to reduce poverty. So that reduction of poverty has to do with the creation of jobs. And when you talk of creation of jobs, you are talking of expanding the economy and then expanding investment within the same economy, and then also taking the result of that same investment in an economy to measure the performance of that economy. These are some of the things that the IMF sometimes take a look. But like I said, the IMF has a desk officer in Nigeria that studies most of the performance, especially of the financial market, and also the potentials of the market, and also the potential of the domestic economy in creating other avenues to create money.
You know, Usual, that's fine, very well stated. The other leg of my question, it was double barrel, probably a bit too heavy.
Yes, sir.
It's as follows. That's what you've told us what the picture that the IMF is showing to us. But internally, I mean, it's like somebody giving you a picture of yourself or giving me a picture of myself. You don't know whether I have a runny tummy and I'm just managing to sit, you know. And I say, look, let's get through the program. What do we know about ourselves to say, look, is this realistic? You know, if we're to take the potential sectors of growth about which Professor Waleke was speaking earlier, when we said, look, temporize a while before we get there. Perhaps we could ask Dr. Muda Yusuf to also come in here. Dr. Muda Yusuf, look, what do we know about goings on, and therefore how can we maximize the projections by the IMF, or alternatively, how do we avoid the negativities that might impact on our growth potential?
To some of the stakeholders in this economy, some of these figures or projections are at best academic. Because as far as they are concerned, when you are looking at a positive outlook for the economy, you'll be looking at first the performance and prosperity of businesses, what is happening to employment, what is happening to poverty, what is happening to inflation, what is happening to capacity utilization of industries. And that is why most times when we talk about growth, whether it's from the IMF or from our local economy, we always talk about growth that is inclusive, because that is what the citizens and investors will relate to at the end of the day. Most times, some of these multilateral projections are dependent largely on what is likely to happen with oil price, given the fact that the economy is highly dependent on oil. And we often see that most times there's often a correlation in these projections between what is happening in the global oil market and the growth projection, always a positive correlation. Whereas, coming back to the question you asked earlier, as to what are the peculiarities of the economy and what are the things we need to be looking at to ensure that the citizens and investors actually feel the impact of any growth that we claim is happening in the economy. I mean, look at the investment environment, for instance. There are some sectors, as we speak, that are still in recession, even though we say the larger economy is out of recession. Manufacturing, for instance, is going through a lot of challenges as we speak. Many of them are having challenges. They can't even get raw materials because of the challenges in the foreign exchange market. Look at what is happening to inflation. Because these manufacturers cannot produce, there are a lot of shortages in the market and prices are going up on a daily basis. Look at what is happening to our currency. And look at the impact. Just talk to any average Nigerian. Just go to the market and talk to them. You will feel the pain of the average Nigerians, especially around the issue of the way that prices are galloping. These are investment climate issues. These are also welfare issues. So if we talk about the economy and we are not relating to these fundamentals, the discussion or conversation will just be academic. So we are worried, particularly in business, about the fundamentals of the business environment as it relates to whatever growth we are talking about. There has to be an alignment. Manufacturing capacity utilization is dropping on a daily basis because of the crisis in the foreign exchange market. We have seen an improvement in global oil price. We expect to have seen some better inflows in the foreign exchange market, better rates, exchange rate, and all of that. But that is not happening. There's so much uncertainty around investment, around getting equipment, around getting raw materials. The same thing with inflation. Look at the implication of security for the economy. I'm not sure the IMF is capturing all of this. The toll that this is taking on the economy is huge. Look at what that has done to the agricultural sector. Look at what that has done to even investors' confidence. Look at what it has done to the image and perception of Nigeria as a country in terms of investment. These are the terrible things that are making headlines globally. Look at poverty, look at unemployment statistics that we had. 33%. Youth unemployment is about 45% or close to 50%. These are very fundamental issues. And unless we begin to link some of these growth numbers to these fundamentals, all of these things will just be academic. If I go to my members now and I'm telling them that the projection is looking positive and all of that, they will ask me about what is happening to the foreign exchange market, what is happening in the ports. If you talk to exporters now, even in spite of all the electronic call-up you have in the ports, there's a major crisis in the port area. Exporters cannot get into the ports. Empty containers are flooding everywhere. And there's an issue of bringing sanity into our ports. And you know how critical a port is to a country. Whether you are talking of import, you are talking of exports. You need to connect with the international, the global economy. And the way you connect is through your ports. There are regulatory issues. You know, so all of these things for us are even much more fundamental when we are talking about growth. So growth has to be inclusive, and we have to relate all of this to issues of the investment climate. The investment climate is deteriorating. Thank you.
Now, gentlemen, with all the facts, you know, that Dr. Moda Yusuf has just enumerated, are we still looking at these IMF projections as being realistic, you know, considering that domestically speaking, that we seem to have a myriad, you know, of uncertainties, you know, in the business environment, you know, has already, you know, laid it bare. So, Professor Waleke, come in here, you know, what are really the indicators for Nigeria's economic growth this year vis-a-vis the IMF projection?
Yeah, thank you. You see, GDP growth is one thing, then inclusive growth, okay, you know, is another. That's the quality of the growth is another issue. The quality of the growth, which translates to, you know, development, you know, is another. But we also know that that growth is a necessary condition for you to also have, you know, development. It's important that, you know, this be said, that part of why we even emerged from recession in the fourth quarter of 2020 was because of the ease in lockdowns. It was major. And going forward, for this projection to be realized or to materialize, it's also important that all manner of restrictions be removed now. Okay, I say this because I still hear that there are certain categories of workers who have yet to, you know, commence work. So it's important that all manner of workers, all civil servants, you know, return to their desks, because that will facilitate the implementation of the 2021 budget. So we need to ease restrictions completely and emphasize the, you know, observance of COVID protocols. Because when you ask levels 1 to 12 to stay at home, these people still mingle, they still enter crowded public, you know, buses, they still enter crowded markets and so on. So it doesn't make sense to me to ask them to remain at home. Now, the second thing I also need to mention is that the other sectors that are still in the negative territory, you know, must also be made to pull out of, you know, the negative territory. Okay, manufacturing has been mentioned, and some other sectors. But I want to emphasize that it's important that education sector is also looked into. Okay, there is no reason why at this point in time we should be entertaining industrial actions from those who work in tertiary institutions. So this is the time to end all manner of strikes, especially from these two sectors, you know, where strikes are prevalent, education and health. We don't have any reason not to meet the demands of resident doctors, for example, or those that teach in tertiary institutions. I know a lot of my colleagues in tertiary institutions that are still owed arrears of salaries. And government doesn't need to borrow. doesn't have to borrow to be able to meet their demands. All that we need to do is to reprioritize, to cut weights. And the good thing is that we have the efficiency unit in the Federal Ministry of Finance, is to make the efficiency unit functional and possibly have it backed by law. If we have it backed by law, the efficiency unit is in a position to make a lot of savings for the economy that will enable us meet the demands of these unions. So I think that's important. And earlier on, I was talking about where I see growth happening. Agriculture, as I said, remains a potential growth driver. It was the agri sector that pulled the economy out of recession in the non-oil sector, generally. Of course, the agri sector contributed in Q4 of 2020. Okay, in spite of the fact that the oil sector plunged by as much as 19%, the non-oil sector grew 1.69%, and then we were out of sun. So agriculture is still key. The interventions in that sector, agri-value chain, must be sustained, especially the ones by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Okay, the construction sector is there. The real sector, the real estate sector, which contributes about 6% to GDP, okay, is also there. So it's important we focus our attention on employment-generating sectors of the economy if this, projection, has to be realized. And on the still on the fiscal side, the point has been made. Insecurity has to be tackled.
Yeah, okay, Professor Waleke,
yes.
I'm sorry to interject. We're talking about focusing on those sectors that can help accelerate growth. We're going to touch on insecurity. I know that's a very critical point.
Yes.
Let's, Yushua will come in here in the meantime. Yushua, you've listened to both Professor Waleke and Dr. Moda. Dr. Moda has given, as it were, some of the practical challenges that our economy is facing at the moment. And some persons will say that in the midst of those challenges, you also have opportunities. I mean, it's talked about the crisis you're having in the Forex market. Investors are having challenges. Manufacturing is heading south in terms of the indices. Growth doesn't appear also to be inclusive. How do we then seize on these challenges and then say, okay, fine, we're going to have to deal with them as opportunities or utilize them as opportunities so that our growth prospects can be a lot higher? I mean, Professor Waleke was talking about construction and research. I hope you are aware of the price of the bag of cement now. Once the price of one of those items goes up, particularly cement, it will affect every other, I don't know how they do it, but it will affect every other thing. You are going to look for paving stone, you will hear the cost. You are going to look for sharp sand, you will hear the cost. You're looking for plaster sand, you will hear the cost. So, who then is going to bring in that money when inflation is rising on the one hand, and Forex challenges and so on and so forth? So, Yushua, how do we maximize these opportunities in the context of 2021?
You see, when you mention opportunity, there is always an angle to which you make use of an opportunity. Pre-COVID-19, President Muhammadu Buhari narrated and presented to the National Assembly that it is his wish to have a collective prosperity. That collective prosperity has to do with the allocation of goods and resources to individuals' household. And in doing such, you have to look at the deficit experienced by the economy and at the same time by the household. In achieving that, there is need for policymakers to carefully look at certain products and their elasticity functions in allocating resources to different segments of the economy. What I mean here is this. Collective prosperity in growth has to do with the income of individuals. You cannot expect an unemployed individual to be part of the prosperity. You don't expect also an underpaid individual to be part of the collective prosperity. So what do? You look at the purchasing power, because it's what is taking every individual to a prosperity, the purchasing power that individual has. Certain products that has multiplier effect, especially the PMS. When you mentioned the price of cement, I was smiling because
you're a dealer or something.
no, I was smiling because of the fact that when you talk to the producers, they will tell you that the cost of doing business is going high. The Forex is also going high. But they don't tell you the profit they are making because none of them is recording loss. So there is need to look at the income inequalities, which has been hinted so much by the IMF. There is a lot of gap. There is a gap between a senator and an electorate. There is a gap between Mr. President and his constituencies. There is a gap between the Minister of Finance and the laborer working with, in a local market. So how do you must create an avenue to bridge the inequalities and also to look at the price, because price is what is allocating resources to individual household. Certain products that we take to adjust prices anyhow is eroding people's income, especially the premium motor spirit. I have said it times a number. 1 kobo means a lot to an entrepreneur in the oil industry, because if he sells 40,000, he makes 40,000 at 1 naira. But that 1 naira is significant to individuals' income, and it is also significant to his purchasing power. And also it is also significant to the cost of doing business. So I'm looking at it that we have to, the CBN, using a lot of fiscal policies, has to bring a clear cut of interest rate in our businesses, because the cost of doing business financially is high. And not only high, you find a situation of a lot of deficit. Deficit in energy, for instance. The cost of doing business cannot be perfected without sufficient energy. And if you are paying high energy rates, definitely your interest, your profit is going to be deflated. If it is deflated, it is simply telling you that somebody's job is at a cost. So that's exactly what is happening. And that is why today, because we cannot maintain price stability, because we cannot control inflation, then we have unemployment rising to 33%. And when you have inflation rising, you have unemployment rising, you have a stagflated economy, and you are already trying to recover the other deficient sectors in that economy, you find it difficult to achieve the tax. So the projection made by the IMF, 2.5, is realistic, and it is not ambitious. But it is also a clear sign that if we can work assiduously, using all instruments available by the monetary and fiscal policies, we can establish price stability, and probably that collective prosperity will begin to emerge.
All right. Thank you indeed. Let's return to Dr. Moda Yusuf. You are the first person to raise certain issues concerning uncertainties in the entire business climate in Nigeria. You talked about your own people who are actually members of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who are directly involved in this, in this economic drive. And you are so concerned about investors' confidence. You're so concerned about the ease of doing business, which I want you to speak on at this moment. We have heard that Nigeria was rated high when it comes to ease of doing business, and I'm sure that it should affect all facets of business endeavor in this country. In your opinion, does the policy on ease of doing business have any role to play in ensuring that Nigeria achieves this 2.5 increase projection, growth projection by the IMF?
Thank you. You see, some of these rankings, and it is also important for us to domesticate or localize some of these things, and also recognize the peculiarities of our own environment. The parameters used in ranking by the World Bank and World Economic Forum and all of that are not exactly the key parameters that have much more impact on business or on citizens in this environment. And I've taken this matter up even with the World Bank, that it is better for you to have parameters that are peculiar to each country. There are things that are taken for granted in many other countries. That is a big issue in this environment. Some of those things don't feature on the ease of doing business parameters. For instance, security. Security is not available on that list. And if you look at the economy today, security is becoming a major issue. It's a major factor in investment and generally in the economic equation. The same thing sometimes with challenges around cost, challenges around electricity. Some of these things are taken for granted in many other countries. So they use the same template for all countries, which doesn't work. And in this environment, some factors have more profound impacts on the economy than others. The template doesn't give weight to some of these factors. They just use general factors, for instance, issue of ease of business registration. You don't register business every day, but we encounter the problem in the ports every day. We encounter electricity problems every day. And when they even talk about electricity, they are talking about ease of connecting to electricity, not the consistency in the delivery of energy. So there are issues around the templates that are being used. But having said that, when we talk about economy, it is good to celebrate some of these growth numbers, maybe at the macroeconomic level. But it's very important, and even more important, to connect this to first investment, second to welfare, as other speakers have said. And going forward, my view is that in order to scale up the confidence of investors, and when I say investors here, I'm not talking just about foreign investors. I'm talking about local investors. I'm talking about SMEs. I'm talking about multinationals, conglomerates, across board. Because all of them at different levels are bringing significant value to this economy. But if they don't have confidence, the economy will continue to go down irrespective of what growth numbers we are posting. So we need to bring confidence around issues of the foreign exchange market. Because I keep saying this, it is important both for inflows and for outflows. Because no economy is an island. So my view is that the CBN needs to go back to the drawing board to look at this foreign exchange policy so that the kind of cries that we are hearing from manufacturers will put an end to it. Secondly, we need to focus more on our ports. There have been various efforts to reform the ports, but we are not making progress. We are still on the same spot, as it were. So we need very strong political will, and we don't want to see players in the ports that are looking as if they are untouchables, that cannot be regulated, that are getting away with all sorts of things in the name of either chasing revenue or in the name of just being a concessionaire or all of this. And this has to cut across all the players in the ports. Whether we are talking about shipping companies, we are talking about the customs, we are talking about regulators in the port, we are talking about terminal operators. All of these agencies, we need to get them to do things that will promote growth and investment. The bottom line should not only be revenue or profit. The bottom line should be what impact are they making on the growth of investment in this environment. Because if you don't have investment, we cannot create jobs. If you don't have investment, government revenue too cannot improve. Because ideally, revenue should be coming from tax, not necessarily from oil all the time. But if the business are not doing well, how can the tax revenue grow? So these issues are important, and the issue of security is very, very important. It's an economic issue, just as a social issue, just as also a humanitarian issue. We need to deal with it firmly. What we are doing so far, we are not getting results yet. And it's affecting the economy in so many ways. So these are the fundamental things. And of course, there are reforms that are ongoing that we need to pursue, reforms around the oil and gas sector, reforms around the electricity sector. Those things are also very important to get this economy going, to instill or to inspire confidence of investors. So those are the things I think we should be looking at so that we can have an economy that is more inclusive and that is more sustainable. What the people in the Northwest, in the North, what they require more is not so much the social investment or the handouts. What they require more is an environment that will allow them to go back to the farms and contribute to the economy. That is what they need. And that is where the emphasis should be from the economic point of view.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, I'm tempted to stay with you because, again, you have raised some issues that I would like you to further clarify. The most casual observer cannot fail to notice that usually two major triggers for inflationary pressure in the economy, Forex and fuel price increase. Now, when we were in a recession in 2016, the central bank, through its own monetary policy intervention, introduced a number of measures, including the placement of some 41 or so items on the prohibition list in terms of access to Forex. But we have seen, since we exited recession, and particularly in the face of the pandemic and in recent months, how the exchange rate has become somewhat volatile. And you're saying that government needs to do something, or rather the monetary authorities would need to do something about the crisis in the FX market. What would you like to see done in the first instance?
Well, the point is this. What we have now is something like an administrative allocation of Forex, which is an issue for many of us. Because when you have scarcity and you administratively allocate, you are going to have a crisis on your hand. It's like managing a price control environment. It has never worked in this system, especially when there is scarcity. Secondly, is the fact that when you have these multiple windows, it attracts a lot of people I would call parasites and brokers into the foreign exchange market. Because these people are in the foreign exchange equation, not so much because they have any direct need for foreign exchange, either to import raw materials or import equipment, but because they are in the system to take advantage of the premium that exists between the multiple windows. So this is why we are saying that it is better to, as much as possible, collapse all these windows so that we don't have multiple windows where we will be shopping from one window to the other. I must admit that there has been some progress in trying to narrow this down, but we need to do a lot more. And we also need to revisit this idea of, exclusion lists, moving some people out of the market and all of that. That is also creating a whole lot of distortions. Because if in our import prohibition list, some of these things are not prohibited, when we now come to the FX window, they are prohibited. It's a contradiction. Those things create confusion in the economy. We have the fiscal authority, we have the tariff book that listed items that should be prohibited, items that should not come in. Now we have another parallel list from the central bank that is saying that these items cannot come into the foreign exchange market. It's a confusion and it's a contradiction. We need to align these things properly. Then we need to have policies that will attract a lot more inflows into the economy. If there is an uncertainty in the Forex market, the inflows that will come, either from foreign direct investment, from foreign inflows, portfolio inflows, from diaspora remittances, from export proceeds, those inflows will not come through the normal channel. So if we clear all of these uncertainties and make the system a lot more transparent, these inflows will come properly into the system. And that will also help the supply side. Because when we are talking about Forex, it's not just about people going to buy Forex or import things. It's also about people who want to bring in the Forex into the economy. We have to put incentives on the table. The CBN has taken one such step, which is good, which is about this dollar to naira something for diaspora remittances. That is one good step. But the CBN should go further than that and make sure that we expand this kind of incentives to other forms of inflows so that this money can come in, so that we are dealing both with the supply side and we're also dealing with the demand side, so that we don't over-concentrate on the demand side of the equation. So those are the kind of things we like to say.
All right, Dr. Muda Yusuf, actually, you seem to have a lot of, pertinent issues, concerning the policies of government towards making things easier for the business community in this country. And I want to believe that there should be another forum, where you could present some of these things I've mentioned here, this morning, because they're very, very important and pertinent. Of course, we're all looking forward to seeing that we even not just to get to the 2.5% growth, but to surpass it. But from all you have mentioned here, there seem to be a lot of uncertainties along the line that could be, taken care of perhaps in other fora. We want to thank you immensely for your contribution this morning on Good Morning Nigeria, and wish you well in all your undertakings. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we will be concluding this program. But of course, I'm letting our guests also speak on other issues remaining for us to call it a day on this show today. Stay with us.
You're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, live on NTA's network service. Let's bring in again Professor Uche Uwaleke with regard to some of the critical issues that we'll need to discuss in terms of the non-oil sectors that we can encourage to facilitate growth. Agriculture, telecoms, we saw that those were the primary drivers in helping us exit the recession in 2020 earlier than had been anticipated. But we also saw the critical role that solid minerals played in the past. Throughout the recession period of 2016 to 2017 or thereabout, agriculture and solid minerals were driving the fundamentals, the numbers of our GDP. But in recent times, solid minerals has fallen off. There's been an embargo on mining in some parts of the country on account of insecurity. And we have also seen some hazards with regard to agriculture. Let's forget the policies that are in place. But how is security likely going to be a factor? Of course, we are seeing also what some state governments are doing, what the military is also doing, and what the police authorities are also trying to do. Can we, in aggregate terms, when all of these begin to yield results, expect more salutary outcomes from, say, agriculture and solid minerals?
Yeah, Kinsley, the issue of insecurity cannot be overemphasized. The fact that food inflation, it's as high as 21.7% today, is largely attributed to the insecurity in many parts of the country, especially the food belt regions. Insecurity is also partly responsible for the drop we had in capital importation in the country in 2020. Capital importation in the country was around $9 billion. Compare that to over $20 billion, the year before that. So insecurity is a problem, and that's why I think it's time that something was done about it. And in my view, I would recommend that this issue. Recently, we've seen regions now trying to set up their own security outfit, the latest being the Southeast region. I think it's time we took a look at the issue of state police. I think state police will go a long way to solve the problem of insecurity. But having said that, let me quickly make my recommendations before time runs out. Now, if the target of 2.5% projection by the IMF, if it must be met, then on the fiscal side, of course, we've talked about insecurity. Insecurity has to be tackled, and it's also important that the government pays attention to the quality of fiscal deficit, the quality of the borrowings that we're making. If you look at the numbers by the Debt Management Office, okay, the domestic instruments for raising loans by the federal government, the FGN bonds represent over 70% of that. The real infrastructure bonds, the real money that is borrowed for purposes of infrastructure, okay, talking about Sukuk and Grey bonds, is less than 3%. Okay, so that has to be looked into. And recently, again, as I mentioned earlier, I read the government is also planning to issue Euro bonds. Okay, Euro bonds have their own shortcomings. If you also look at our debt profile, Euro bonds account for about 40% of external debt, but they represent over 59% of the debt service. So what that tells you is that Euro bonds, are quite expensive relative to other debt instruments. So it's important we pay attention to the quality of the fiscal deficit. Borrowings must be tied to self-liquidating projects. That is the only way we can, ensure that the economy, grows. Now, on the part of monetary policy, I also want to enjoin the central bank to continue this accommodative, monetary policy, recognizing the fact that inflation rate in this country, is not caused by monetary factors. It's largely as a result of, high, supply side deficits. So it's important that the central bank continues to engender a low interest rate environment, because that is what will even help businesses and lead to improve their output. Now, closely tied to that is the issue of this PMS, the price of pump price of fuel. In April last year, 2020, oil price was $19 per barrel. Today, oil price is in excess of $60 per barrel. So there is no way that government is not subsidizing the pump price of fuel. Okay, what I will recommend to address the issue is for the government to roll out compensation measures and then wash its hands off subsidy, because it has been proven that the richest 20% of households consume 6 times more fuel than the poorest 20% of households. So fuel subsidy is regressive no matter how we look at it. It's important the government washes its hands off fuel subsidy, but puts in place compensation measures that will directly affect the poor. Now, on the issue of Forex, it is the practicality of the suggestion made that I'm looking at. The 2021 budget has been based on $379 per barrel. There are dollar-denominated components of that budget. Now, if you collapse by all exchange rates, and you have exchange rate maybe in the region of 400 and something naira, that will certainly affect the budget. That will also affect even the cost of importing this fuel we're talking about, because it also means that the pump price of fuel, will be a lot higher than where it is today. So it is the practicality of that happening, and that's why what has to happen is a gradual approach. It's a multi-stage approach, to unification of exchange rates. There's no doubt at all that a unified exchange rate has a lot of merit,
Professor
but that can't happen overnight.
We would like to thank you for all this analysis. As a matter of fact, the complexity of it all is what will actually make governments to step up in terms of managerial capacity of the entire economic environment of this country. From all you have said this morning, it does appear that we need to do a lot more job, with respect to the management of the nation's economy. I'd like to bring Yushau Aliyu here to come with your closing thoughts. So with respect to all the issues that we have raised, with respect to the, getting the 2.5% growth or even surpassing it as a nation, considering all the uncertainties, considering all the policies, physical and monetary, and what have you.
I would like to commend the central bank and also to urge the central bank to continue to apply sense in taking these stabilization measures that is stabilizing the income of small and medium enterprises, and at the same time also to call on the Minister of Petroleum Resources under President Buhari that we need a capacity to continue to produce locally our refined product so that our industries can work. And at the same time, there is no economy that will record prosperity. Every Nigerian needs energy, and this energy is highly deficient. There is need to have a proper tariff, and at the same time to have proper production to attend to the requirement of domestic economy, especially the household.
All right, thank you very much, Yushua. We have some tweets. Let's just go over these tweets quickly, Kirian. Festus Akimboyewa, the IMF revised Nigeria's economic growth upwards, shows we're on the right economic path. But while the risk of COVID-19 has reduced in Nigeria, other risks, especially insecurity, still exist. Governments, therefore, should allow the private sector to lead the growth, while at the same time do all it can to support the growth of our economy by spending more.
Delegate Solomon says, based on experience of other countries, embracing more open trade and competition policies would help diversify the economy, reinvigorate growth, and help sustain the positive outlook of recovery, particularly as the African Continental Free Trade Area takes effect.
Suleiman Babagana, economic growth projection by the IMF in a positive direction is a yardstick that the policies of the country are indeed commendable, but its impact on the common man leaves much to be desired. Therefore, social inclusion in policies is required.
Balanoga, every organization can issue out their received report about any nation. The fact is, it will be foolhardy to constantly live by reports of others. This means we don't have a mind of our own. What is our own agreed projection report outside external bodies?
Steve Bond 007, it's all on paper. The man on the street can't feel it. A sachet of pure water is now 15 naira. Where are they selling 15 naira?
I don't know actually. Law Alpha-C.
Yes.
Nigeria should not be perturbed by Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF. Our concerns should be on how to fix the economy by encouraging production, which would ensure employment and reduce taxation on SMEs.
All right, so those are the tweets that we can accommodate this morning. On that note, we'd like to appreciate our guest, Professor Uche Waleke, who is a professor of capital markets and president of the Capital Markets Academics of Nigeria. Prof, delight having you this morning.
Thank you.
Yushau Aliyu, financial analyst, we appreciate your being around with us this morning. Earlier, we signed off the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Muda Yusuf. So, that's it for us today on Good Morning Nigeria. We'd like to thank you for tuning in. The program returns same time tomorrow, 7 in the morning. Until then, you take care of yourself. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirian Umayo. Thanks for watching.